What does the goddamn line say, Tony?
Please do not use gendered language.
Then what? I'll be arrested, put in airport jail?
Look, you're going completely sideways, man.
It's a big club, and you ain't in it.
How dare you?
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
I'm Chris Hansen with Dave on NBC.
Jack Marius, Tack Theratrix.
Hi, I'm Spartacus.
Dave Jackson, Sacramento, he, him. Steven Seagal.
Sex Offender Guard.
I'm Keith Morris.
This is Muammar Gaddafi.
I'm Rick James, bitch.
Sorting through the lies.
The hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
We cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
And uncovering the centuries-long plan for world domination.
Learning about Cuba, having some food.
Let's talk about Chinese people.
Have you ever been in a Turkish prison? Swangles in Fort Lauderdale.
I have sent 6 of my Libyan missiles to blow up the Sears hardware department.
Nothing could be more fun than jumping off a cliff with 2 German bisexuals.
Oh, you English are so superior, aren't you?
Thank you, comrade.
And now, Macroaggressions.
That's what assholes call it.
With your host.
Buddy, I don't know who you are, but you're about to get chlamydia.
Charlie Robinson.
Hey, Whitey, where's your hat?
You want to drop the blame on Charlie and say it's all Charlie's fault.
He was a retard.
I get some goddamn diuretic.
Welcome to Macroaggressions. I'm your host, Charlie Robinson. Thank you for checking us out. If you're watching on Iconic or you're listening to us wherever podcasts are served, we certainly do appreciate your support. Our sponsors, we're sponsored by 2 different people, 2 different companies. Curiosity Stream. If you are a documentary film geek like I am, you've got to check out Curiosity Stream. They have thousands of documentary television shows and movies available, unlimited streaming. You can stream it to your laptop, your television, your phone, your tablet. You can view it offline or worldwide. Right now they have a sale, $12 for the year. That's $1 a month. You've got to be kidding me. You've got to have 3 cents a day to invest in education. Check out Curiosity Stream. The link will be in the description box below. And our other sponsor is Scribd. I'm into ebooks, audiobooks, you name it. They have unlimited audiobooks for you. It's $9.99 a month. You can get magazines, you can get ebooks, you can get audiobooks, as much as you can handle over the course of a month. Why don't you try out? Your first month is free. If you don't like it, you can cancel anytime. The link is in the description below, and support for our sponsors helps to directly impact and support our show. We certainly do need that and appreciate it. Well, if there's one person that I know who has always had a pretty good handle on what's going on in this world, it would be our next guest, James Perloff. He is an author. He's written many great books, including Truth is a Lonely Warrior and Tornado in a Junkyard, and you can find him at jamesperloff.com. And if you liked SGT Report like I do, I'm a fan, you will be happy to know that James' interview called God is Real is the #1 viewed interview that Sean has done on SGT Report. I think that's a testament to the two of them working together to tackle some very important issues. So, James, how are you doing? Welcome to the show. Let's talk about this insanity that we are living in. First of all, how are you doing in the Boston area?
Personally, I had a few things that slight emergencies that came up this morning, so I wasn't doing too well. So we had to delay the start of this by about 30 minutes. But Boston is we're shut down like everybody else. You know, the restaurants are shut down, the businesses are shut down, and I should mention. For those who don't know it, I am a registered nurse. I retired last year, but I've been a registered nurse for 45 years. And I've said from the outset that from what I was looking at, that this is a complete overreaction. And the further we go forward, we see that it's a gross overreaction to this COVID-19 situation. But Boston, like the rest of the country, is being seriously impacted.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm in Denver. I was when it all sort of broke out. We were on vacation in Florida, and it was all very normal there. I have to say, we didn't notice all of the insanity of it all. Then now, as I'm back in the Denver area, it's just like that TV show on Discovery Channel, Life After People. You know, you go around and there's nothing there. There's fewer and fewer people out. It's kind of creepy and disconcerting. But one of the things that you tackle, especially in Truth is a Lonely Warrior, and I did as well in my book, The Octopus of Global Control, and actually it's kind of the theme of this entire podcast, is this New World Order plan for world domination. Now, when you talk about this sort of stuff with people that are not consumers of this type of content, inevitably you'll get an eye roll or somebody that will say, oh, you and your New World Order, talk. But, I have to remind people that George H.W. Bush mentioned the New World Order over 200 times in his 4 years in office. This is not our term that we have invented for them. This is their term that they openly speak about. We may be crazy conspiracy theorists, but it's not for bringing up the fact that there is a New World Order. This is their plan. And everybody, whether you're an author or a journalist or somebody that makes documentary movies or just YouTube clips, we all have a different take on who they are and what they're working towards. So I'm interested to know what it is, if you had to define this shadowy group, how would you describe them, and what is it that you, in your opinion, you think they actually want?
Well, I've been on a learning curve with this over the years. I first got introduced to the New World Order in 1978 with Gary Allen's book, None Dare Call It Conspiracy. And he talked in there about the Fed and the Council on Foreign Relations. It's a pretty good book, still is. And he talked about how the John Birch Society was fighting against them. And it just happened, me living in Boston, I was just a few miles from their headquarters in Belmont, Mass. They've moved since then. But I got semi-involved over there, and then I got really involved. I became a writer for their magazine, The New American. And my perspective for a long time was, this is the elite, it's the globalists, it's the WASP, Rockefeller, Morgan people that are running this. And as I moved forward, though, by the late 90s, I began to realize much more the Zionist component. The John Birch Society tended to stay away from that for fear of being labeled anti-Semitic. I'm half Jewish myself, by the way. I was not raised Jewish at all, but ethnically, I'm half Jewish. So I never worry about people accusing me of anti-Semitism. But I think the one thing that kind of turned me around, and this may sound kind of funny because it came out of the mainstream, was I was watching in the late 90s the History Channel, and it was a little bit more forthcoming than it is now, did a special on Rudolf Hess, the deputy Führer of Germany, who made this mysterious flight in May of 1941 into Britain with a peace plan. And I looked at this and I said, well, now I'd written a lot on Pearl Harbor. And I said, isn't this interesting? This is a great story. The Germans were trying to seek peace. They didn't want a two-front war. They knew war was just about to break out with Russia. But the New American wanted no part of it. But after that, and after I read a book post 9/11 called Truth is Stranger Than Fiction that talked about the Israeli role in 9/11, I started to take a look at Israel and the Zionists, and I said, you know what? Zionism, just like globalism and communism, is part of the New World Order. And I've realized that they are very, very high. If you look back at the records, it seems that Rockefeller and Morgan, who we looked at kind of the kingpins of the old American establishment, were really just satellites of the Rothschilds and what they were after. But I have to also say that if you look at the really grand scheme of things, this plot is Luciferian. And anybody who has watched the ceremonies of Bohemian Grove or has seen the interviews with Ronald Bernard, the Dutch currency manipulator, has made tremendous revelations about the satanic child ritual sacrifice that takes place at the highest banking circles. You realize that if you're looking at a hierarchy, I think it's a Satanist on top. I think it's the Zionists beneath them. I think they've got their WASP Freemasonic allies beneath them because they can't do it all by themselves. That's kind of how the hierarchy plays out for me. But as to what they're after, they are still after a New World Order. But in addition to world government, and they've done that through consolidating the power of the media, down to 5 corporations from 50 in 1983. The consolidating religions, this is what ecumenicism is all about. They want a one world religion. And they want ultimately a one world government with a capital in Jerusalem. It seems that Jerusalem being the most holy city to Muslims, Christians, and Jews alike, they want their Antichrist to rule from there. I think that's a reasonable guess based upon what we're seeing with Trump moving the capital. I'm recognizing the capital of Israel as being not Tel Aviv, but Jerusalem, moving our embassy there and encouraging other countries to do the same. You can see how it's all being set up. So yes, they're after a new world order with Jerusalem as a capital, world domination, and it's not going to be fun. That much I can promise.
Yeah. And you mentioned Ronald Bernard, the Dutch banker. And this is an interesting component to it because I knew about the occult rituals. I knew about the sacrificing of children and all that. But I mistakenly made the assumption that was maybe limited to governmental type people and maybe the Hollywood elite that we hear a little bit about. But it never crossed my mind for whatever reason to also associate it with banking. And I don't know why I didn't. I just figured it just didn't seem like a fit. But then when I saw the video that he did, and I encourage anyone to check this out, and I'm assuming it's still available online, although
it is. I checked a couple days ago.
Okay, good. It is. You want to talk about a guy having a breakdown. This was as real of a conversation as I could, it didn't seem fake or anything. It seemed as organic as possible that he was talking about being asked to do things to go to the next level through this banking organization he was a part of that involved sacrificing a child, and he couldn't do it. You bring a spiritual component into a lot of your work. And you mentioned this being Luciferian in nature. What is the difference between, or is there even a difference between Luciferianism and Satanism? Is there a dividing line between that? Is it a religion? Is it a philosophy? Is it something you have to be born into? Can you be invited into it? And obviously, in Ronald Bernard's case, it seems like you're brought in and you're given sort of like the way you'd be initiated into a gang. Blood in, blood out. They've got to have the dirt on you. So, is this just the elite's version of the Crips and the Bloods? I mean, what is the Luciferian component of this?
Well, I think it is true that you're brought in or born in. And, probably you'd want to speak to somebody like Freeman Fly or Michael Joseph, one of the occult experts on the difference between Luciferianism and Satanism. But I'm saying that Luciferianism is sort of the side of Satanism that puts a brighter light upon it, that makes it look better, kind of like the white magic or the dark side of the Force opposed to the lighter side of the Force. But ultimately, they're both evil. That's how I'd see it. They're definitely not of God. But for Satan to actually rule the earth ultimately, as the Antichrist or through the Antichrist, he's going to have to initially come on in a positive way, or people aren't going to accept him. When he initially rules, I believe he's going to take away a lot of the evil that we see. For example, we see a lot of bad weather, which is being attributed to climate change. But we know that's coming from HAARP and from advanced military operations that have been developed, or even since the World War II, when they're seeding clouds of the Vietnam War, when they extended the monsoon season. This is not new. But the Antichrist can make all that stop simply by turning it off. and make it appear that he was like Jesus calming the waters on the Sea of Galilee. Look, I made the storm stop, and people would say, this must be God. I think when he comes on, he's going to come on as a savior initially, a fake savior. And he's going to have a lot of knowledge, kind of like Jesus had knowledge about, if you're familiar with the Bible, the woman at the well. He's going to know people through AI, through advanced knowledge. He's going to know so many things that AI has been collecting on us. But when he does get accepted and people do submit to his control, that's when I think you'll see the worst part of evil start to show itself. So I think that's when you would see the satanic side as opposed to the lighter Luciferian side.
Gotcha. And this this plan, this New World Order. No, we've talked about how it's multi-generational. And say what you will about these people. I don't like them. I don't respect them, but they do have the ability to put a long-term plan in place. They are not afraid to make this something that maybe they will not enjoy in their lifetime, but maybe their further generations down will. It seems it's, I've described it as a multi-generational plan for world domination. So how do you go about, David Icke talks about the totalitarian tiptoe. As you go, instead of going from A to Z, you go from A to B and B to C, and you make it small incremental steps. So how, from where we see right now the world, how does the New World Order take it to the next level? Is this the removal of borders? Is it the coming together? And you talked about a one world religion. How do they get everybody to come to the agreement? We're all countries are fighting against one another. How do they get us to change that way of thinking and switch more to a one world system? How do they sell that?
Historically, they've done that, of course, through the establishment of things like the League of Nations, the UN, in both cases using world wars as an excuse to intimidate people into accepting world government. So it has been a gradual process, and David Icke is quite correct. They boiled the frog over the years. But I think we're seeing a great example right now of bringing nations together under this coronavirus, where you see nations from China to America now instituting totalitarian, very similar, comparable totalitarian measures to get people. By the way, I've got a bit of a frog in my voice. I apologize for that. Measures to combat the coronavirus. That seems to be something that has universal appeal, and that they're able to apply at a universal level. Very few countries, with some exceptions, such as Mexico up until recently and Belarus, have been revolting against the coronavirus lockdown. But we're seeing an example of that taking place right now.
Yeah. It seems like the globalist New World Order people have their fingerprints all over this coronavirus. It doesn't strike me as being a natural or organic event. It seems a little bit more like a made-for-TV event. Are you getting the same feeling from this?
Yeah, it's quite a media show. Again, I've been a registered nurse for 45 years, retired last year. But as soon as this came out, I saw that we were doing some strange things, like people were being treated as if they were lepers. Normally only sick people are treated with social distancing. You don't treat healthy objects. There was a news story just a couple of days ago that Howard County in Indiana has now banned the sale of all non-essential items, including books. It's getting to be completely insane. And it is not sensible. I know, speaking as a medical professional, that you don't react this way. We see many ways in which the coronavirus is not being treated logically. Just to give some examples, we know that we've seen worse pandemics take place. For example, the H1N1 swine flu under Obama, that killed, 257,000 people were hospitalized. We had, I believe, 12,000 die, which is far more so far than coronavirus in America. And there was no response, no demand for lockdown, no demand for isolation, no demand for social distancing. This has occurred many times. In fact, if you go to the CDC site currently, they have a list of the number of deaths from ordinary flu each year, and it's usually in tens of thousands each year. And we don't see these kinds of reactions. So it does not even begin to make sense. Now, I know that some people are saying that the death rate is higher, but actually, that seems to be an exaggeration as well. Unfortunately, I didn't have quite time to get some up-to-date figures before this. This is from about 5 days ago. But from 5 days ago, Japan had suffered a total of 49 deaths from coronavirus out of a population of 126 million. Singapore, 2 deaths. Russia, a total of 3 deaths. India, which has 1.3 billion people, 10 deaths. We're not looking at a massive destroyer here. This is not the Black Plague. Germany says the death rate is only 0.4%. That's pretty typical for a flu. And that's what I think we're really looking at as coronavirus is something that commonly causes a cold. We are looking at a different version of it this year because viruses do mutate typically annually. But even in Italy, where they state that they have a higher death rate, the Italian government says that 99% of those that have died already had a pre-existing disease, such as cancer, pneumonia, chronic lung disease, diabetes, some other underlying disease. And according to the World Health Organization, and this is right on their website, if you don't have a pre-existing condition, your chances of dying from coronavirus are less than 1%. So this is a total media fabrication. And I'm sure, Charlie, you've seen some of the videos that have been coming out of people visiting hospitals where they claim that there's apocalyptic conditions occurring, and they're finding that the nurse at the emergency room is reading a magazine, and the ambulances are sitting silently outside, and there's none of these conditions taking place. So yes, this is a media event, and this is designed to bring about the conditions we're seeing. The financial reset and the police state, I think, are the two foremost of those.
Yeah, I am friends with Jason Goodman, who does a show called Crowdsource the Truth. He's based in New York City. He was doing where he was walking around. He was going from hospital to hospital with his camera, and
Elmhurst, right?
Yeah, and he said, "I don't see anything. There's nobody here." And he was talking to people, chatting with ambulance drivers that were around the back, and they were saying, "Yeah, we're just kind of waiting." And and I would say that the statistics that show all these deaths, and if deaths are low or deaths are high. Look, anybody that's dying from any of these things, obviously, we're not trying to make light of their death. I think what we're saying is that just from a statistical standpoint, the reaction is disproportionate to the actual number of cases. And you, from your work in the medical industry, I'm curious because it seems like the CDC has a history of always classifying sort of fringe deaths as flu related in order to bump up the flu numbers so that they can then push out the flu shot fairly consistently. So is this another case of them just associating anybody that might have been in contact with coronavirus and then dying of who knows what, just saying, yep, we're going to take that label and slap it on this death and call this a coronavirus related death? Are they?
Yes. I believe that is happening. In fact, there's a good 10-minute video by Vernon Coleman. I probably don't even have to spell that. He's a doctor in the UK. And he's pointing out that one of the ways that they augment the death rate for coronavirus is this. They tend to do the coronavirus test on people in hospital who have died or in a very morbid condition. But there are a lot of people that don't go to the test to be tested, who stay out of the hospital, who just have a cough and minor symptoms. They don't get the test done, and so that tends to give the test results a high percentage than is actually the true percentage that you would see out there.
Yeah, it seems insane to me that in this world where we live through the fakest unemployment numbers and a juiced up stock market with it and $21 trillion missing and FASB 56 accounting rules kicking in and everything. Why would anybody believe any statistic that they get from the government at this point on anything. If they put out a statistic of the number of dogs that have wagged their tails, I wouldn't believe it. I mean, is there a less credible source of information than the American government and the American media, and then yet we're treating these reports and like they're the gospel, and we are acting in a way that is, look, I mean, we're taking it seriously, but so much of what we've been told by the mainstream media over the years and years, are they not the boys who cried wolf, or in CNN's case, the boys who cried wolf blitzer?
Well said. Yeah, all you have to do is look at the number of times we've been lied to by the media and the government. And just to take an example, Iraq, in 1991, we fought the Gulf War over incubator baby deaths that never happened. And that's well documented. Even Wikipedia now admits that was fake. And then in 2003, we went to war with Iraq again, and this time it was over weapons of mass destruction. Once again, we were lied to. And we've been lied to so many times. And the media does not disagree. When Trump decided last time to drop cruise missiles on Syria, do you know there was not a single media outlet, not a single newspaper that disagreed with that? Either they were silent or they agreed that we should bomb Syria. Yeah. And the idea that there's an independent media within the mainstream, now that we're down from 6 to 5 corporations running the media, you've got Time Warner and CBS, Viacom, and News Corp, and GE, and what's the one that I'm leaving out now? I'm leaving one. Disney. Okay, that's the fifth one. Running over 90% of the media, and it's totally consolidated, and people are thus easily swayed into an orchestrated truth by the media, which is always backing up the government and never questioning the basic paradigm that's being presented to us.
Yeah, it's interesting to see, the people that are pushing for. We can see where this is going. It's going. You don't have to put on your tinfoil hat to understand that this is headed towards a mandatory vaccination. We've got Bill Gates talking about vaccinations. And as I pointed out on Twitter, sort of jokingly, if anyone would know about viruses, it would be the guy that created Microsoft Windows, right? As buggy as that software is. So where are we on this push towards a mandatory coronavirus vaccine?
Initially I was concerned that they would push it out before the flu season started to end. I have a feeling, though, that they're going to need a little more time to validate these vaccines before they are forced by public outcry to suspend a lot of the business shutdowns. But my think on this is that probably next winter they'll start to cry coronavirus again, and by then they'll have the vaccines ready and demand it. Speaking of Bill Gates, one of the things that certainly clues us that this was not just happenstance, this coronavirus thing, was this, I know you've heard of it, the simulation exercise, the Event 201 that Bill Gates funded, where they simulated a coronavirus outbreak. We also see that the Israelis started working on a coronavirus vaccine even before the outbreak occurred and said that was just lucky. And so given that Bill Gates has donated billions and billions of dollars to vaccine development, that he has commented on it in a TED Talk that our greatest concern is overpopulation, that his father was a director of Planned Parenthood, the number one provider of abortions. You don't have to think too hard to realize that he is very interested in exploiting this situation and manipulating the situation into mandatory vaccination. And given his background in software, that he would want some type of vaccine that will also track us, that will indicate whether or not we've had the vaccine or not, and will probably follow, I hope not, we may follow China's example of where if you're compliant with government regulations, you get a high social credit score, you get a job, you can travel, but those things will be restricted if your social credit is score. And it would be very, very easy, of course, to institute that in a cyberspace-driven society, which 5G is probably going to bring upon us next.
Yeah, there's so many places to go with this. Oh, and I had it on my list to talk about Bill Gates because he's clearly a part of this. I get the feeling, and you probably do too, but this universal basic income that they're talking about, having that tied into this social credit component, where, as an example, if you don't have your mandatory coronavirus vaccine, you don't get the UBI, and that payment falls off. I mean, you can see them pushing towards that with this $1,200. We're going to give you $1,200, and everyone's saying that's not enough. We need a universal basic income to get the to get everyone down the path and just get them able to buy food, and maybe pay their rent. Can you see that tied into a sort of in conjunction with the mandatory vaccination, like a hoop you have to jump over in order to get your free money from the government?
Definitely. For one thing, I live near Boston, and the average monthly rent for a one-bedroom apartment in Boston as of January was approximately $2,500. So that $1,200 is only going to pay about 2 weeks of rent. So if you're out of a job, and lots of people out of a job, just last week, Zero Hedge reported that 47,000 businesses had been forced to shutter because they could no longer pay their rent. Because when when you're forced to shut down, you're not getting income, and you can't pay your rent, you can't pay your employees, you're forced to lay them off. So we're creating a socialist state right now. And you're right, the $1,200 is not going to last. And I can easily see them using a social credit score as a mandatory gateway to getting your free income from the government and controlling us in that manner.
Yeah, it seems that whenever there's an event, whenever there's any sort of event, whether it's a school shooting, a mass shooting, something like this, people turn to social media to try and get a handle on what's going on.
Right.
It seems to me, and maybe you could elaborate on this, it seems to me like this is going to be used, could be used, or probably will be used as an excuse to monitor social media behavior. We're already starting to see something where Facebook put, maybe about a week ago or so, Facebook was having problems. They said, when people were posting stories about coronavirus, it was saying you violated our terms, and they were kicking those stories out. And Facebook claimed, it was just a bug, which I don't think anybody believes. But is that where we're going, a monitoring of social media sites for people that are talking about anything that does not fall within the establishment guidelines of what is accurate to report on and what is, deemed conspiratorial in the fringes? Right.
One indicator that we've seen that is coming is YouTube last June boasted that they'd taken down 17,000 channels, not videos, but 17,000 channels. And, I used to tune into YouTube, a few years ago, and they would have recommended for you. It'd be like, 9/11 conspiracy, and here's the latest on Hillary Clinton and stuff like that. But now you go there, it's all just innocuous stuff that is irrelevant to me. That's being recommended for me. So they've totally changed their algorithms. And that is one indicator that we are on the way to social media censorship. The other thing is that in the Bill Gates Event 201 simulation, they've got video of that where the leaders of that event are talking about taking people on social media, talking to the social media giants, telling them that for the public good, they have to censor these people. And they actually even speak there about arresting people who oppose government guidelines. And I don't think we're going to see that right away for sure. But if this UBI you were talking about becomes more and more mandatory and based upon social credit, then I think that you would start to see people being shut down. And of course, that they're interested in censorship. And one of the reasons why, of course, YouTube started censoring videos is that, in fact, alt media like our own has been effective in dealing with these false flags and methods of establishing the world government and world control by the deep state. Because we've been effective, they now want to shut us down. And so I certainly would see that just as a natural matter of course forthcoming.
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of people about that who have been affected in the alternative media that have had their view counts reduced, shadow banned, deplatformed outright, had their revenue cut off. It's obviously it's crippling people. It's destroying their ability to make a living doing this. But I've also tried to remind people that it is the best indicator that you're on the right track when they have to resort to these sorts of methods to get you to shut up, and it just means that, as they say, when you're taking the most flack when you're right over the target. So it is an indication to me, at least, that the things that we're talking about, the discussions that we're having, the videos that we're making are important. They're so important that they're creating a certain level of fear within the establishment, and therefore they have to resort to trying to shut us up. And we've talked about Bill Gates a little bit here. I want to go back. Give me your take on who this guy really is. Now, we know what his image is. He's this kind of likable, nerdy guy who made a bunch of money doing Microsoft and everything, but people don't know who his father is. People don't know what his relationship with Gavi, the vaccine, his relationship with selling vaccines internationally. Like, who exactly is this guy? And is he like the stereotypical like Marvel comic book villain?
Yeah. I would tend to think of him in the latter terms. There was a writer in the alt media who's kind of vanished from the scene now. I don't know what's happened to him. He was Dr. John Coleman. He said he was a former MI6 officer, and he wrote a book called The Committee of 300. And he talked about a lot of how people are elevated to the top so that you will think that an individual has created something was really the Tavistock Institute, behind the initial rise of the Beatles. He talked about Harry Potter. I don't want to, I haven't read him for a while, so I don't want to say he said this exactly. He may have been speculating that Harry Potter may have not been written by J.K. Rowling, but actually was a product of something like Tavistock, but they needed somebody out in front. Same thing with the Da Vinci Code with Dan Brown. There was a question. He apparently had not been a very successful novelist, but he was suggested by him, this is the way I want to put it, that perhaps Dan Brown was selected when in fact it was a larger organization behind the entire deal. So I think in the case of Bill Gates, there may be a similar thing. I know that it's been suggested that Microsoft was not so much his own invention, but that there was factors from the government, from the Department of Defense in developing Microsoft and the internet, but they needed a face up front to say that this was, a brainchild. This was an individual brainstorming who brought this on the scene. Probably true for Facebook as well, a greater CIA involvement than Mark Zuckerberg. Again, I don't know the exact details of these things. I'm just putting out there what some people have been saying. And I think that there's almost undoubtedly truth to it, that by putting a human face on it, it makes it more human to us, instead of realizing this is really part of the machine, the New World Order machine that has been developing these things in order to control us.
Yeah, it's funny. The Facebook component even follows almost the same story arc as Bill Gates. Nerdy guy, goes to Harvard, stays there for 1 year, develops this incredible technology, leaves Harvard, goes off and becomes wildly successful. I've always had questions about Mark Zuckerberg once I figured out that Larry Summers was involved at Harvard as the president, and I don't trust that guy at all. And when I know that he's involved with Project for a New American Century, those neocon psychopaths, and then you start to see he's running Harvard, and they have the at least in the social media or the Social Network movie, where you've got the Winklevoss twins versus Mark Zuckerberg, and they're having a battle, and Larry Summers, the president, has to sort of decide who was at fault and who wasn't at fault. And that always kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And I'm not sure if that was just played up for the television component of it, but I know who Larry Summers is. And that's a guy you can't really trust. But getting back to Bill Gates, so he goes off, he goes to Harvard, he leaves, he moves to New Mexico, he starts at Microsoft, they then relocate that up to the Seattle area, to Redmond, and they launch this gigantic company. Then you start to see battles between Microsoft and the government. And that threw me off because I don't know if that was, I always assumed that was an organic fight between the two of them, but now I'm looking back on it and I'm wondering if there might have been more to that story. But anyway, he becomes unbelievably wealthy, and then he does something that the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, and these other unbelievably wealthy families do once they've bought everything that you can buy. They start to want to put their stamp on education. And the Rockefeller Foundation and the Carnegies developed, the compulsory schooling. And they didn't create it, but they were instrumental in bringing that forth. And now you see Bill Gates and his push with Common Core, knowing his background of who he is and what he's all about. Where are we going with Common Core led by Bill Gates? I'm less familiar with his role in Common Core, but there's no question about the fact that education has been supplanted by indoctrination in our public school system. And inasmuch as Bill Gates has been joined into the oligarchy that runs America from behind the scenes, and this is something that over 80 years ago, in 1937, Ferdinand Lundberg documented in his book, America's 60 Families. He pointed out in that book, not as a conspiracy theorist, but as a financial journalist, he said we looked at the financial records and showed that there were 60 families that ran America. And they were not a democracy. And behind the facade of democracy, he pointed out that these people were running the country and choosing our presidential candidates before the nominating conventions took place. Now, over the years, some of those people like the DuPonts take less of a role, but they're still there. They still own billions of dollars of DuPont stock. But other faces like Warren Buffett and Bill Gates have arrived on the scene and but when they come in, they join that oligarchy. They're part of the same worldview. They're part of the same world government view. And each has his own role to play. I think a guy like Bill Gates was needed because the old line Rockefellers didn't have that tech savvy, I guess you might say, that was needed for the latest generation of public mind control. Yeah. And I'm curious that since you brought up Warren Buffett, what do you make of the fact that Bill Gates dropped off of the board of directors from Microsoft and Berkshire Hathaway on the same day, right before right as this coronavirus fear was ramping up? What are we to make of that, if anything? Well, don't you get the impression that he probably, despite his wealth and power, probably takes orders from a higher power somehow that told him that this is we want you to do next? We know that he's given as much as $10 billion at one time to vaccine development. We know how the Indians feel about it. Vaccines, speaking as a registered nurse, I'll have to say that vaccines have done so much damage. There's no doubt in my mind that they are responsible for this autism epidemic. Yeah. Anybody who doubts that, I really think they should watch the movie Vaxxed or watch some of the talks by Del Bigtree. I knew early on when I was a registered nurse, this goes back to 29 years ago when I was at a major Boston hospital, and they said, you have to get 3 hepatitis B vaccines. And I said 3, and I said, why? What's the deal? And I said, well, you might get stuck by a dirty needle that has hepatitis B. It's a very dangerous disease. And I thought, well, we don't recap needles anymore. We drop them in drop boxes, and we don't piggyback IVs with needles anymore. We really don't we use adapters. It's not a risk. And they said we have to get 3 of these vaccines.
And I said, well, I don't want them. I don't think I'm at risk here for getting, stuck by a dirty needle, which would happen to have hepatitis B. I said, well, you'll have to sign waivers. So I signed the waivers, but this is almost 30 years ago. But I made a mental note at that time as a registered nurse that something is wrong here, that they're pushing these vaccines on us that do not make any logical sense. And I said, medicine should be a science. It should be dealing with logical things. And yet we see doctors who now want hepatitis B vaccines given on the day of birth. Well, the only way to get hepatitis B is from a dirty needle or from sex with a prostitute. So why does a baby on the day of birth need the hepatitis B vaccine? But it's worth billions to the vaccine companies by making it mandatory for every birth. It's worth billions, and they have no liability, as I'm sure you know, through the Vaccine Injury Act of 1986. They if a person is injured by a vaccine, you have to go to vaccine court. And if you are able to prove your case, you'll be paid by the U.S. taxpayers, not by the vaccine companies. It's a scam, and it is responsible for Alzheimer's. This is a personal example. It doesn't mean a lot. It's anecdotal, but my mother had severe Alzheimer's for the last 5 years of her life. She died at the age of 94. But severe Alzheimer's, so severe she couldn't remember what was said 5 words before. But she got a flu shot faithfully every week. Now, my father, on the other hand, he did not trust doctors. He never got a flu shot. And at the age of 99, he was clear as a bell, could still remember Charles Lindbergh flying overhead in 1927. Now, granted, they're two different people with different genetics. You can say, oh, well, they're two different people. It doesn't mean that much. But I think for me, it kind of exemplifies the difference. And I would just tell people to stay away from vaccines. I had this argument with my doctor every year. He wants me to get the flu shot. I say, no, I'm not going to get it. Even the CDC admits there's mercury in the flu shot still. And that mercury, as you get older, is going to take a toll on your nervous system. It's going to hurt you. As far as I'm concerned, the mercury and aluminum are probably the main culprits in the Alzheimer's epidemic that we're looking at today. When you get older, my mother was 89 when she developed Alzheimer's, you can't take it any longer. But yeah, vaccines, bad stuff, and part of the population control agenda, which we know is widespread among, we call the global elite. I don't like to use that word elite because they're not elite to me. They're just us Luciferians.
Yeah, I put a section in my book that showed the instructions according to I forget which government agency. These are the things that you're supposed to do if you break a thermometer in your house. It was, if the mercury gets out, and it was like, cut out the carpet, take all of the drapes down, throw them away, maybe even burn them or something. It was ridiculous, the number of steps they had. Yet when it comes to injecting directly into newborn children that don't have a fully developed immune system, go for it. Yeah. You want to put ethyl mercury in? Go for it. That's fine. Yeah. Why was plutonium not available? I mean, my goodness, what were they were putting this together. I think that the vaccine. I've listened to Del Bigtree speak. I mean, I saw Vaxxed in the theaters even, and then saw him speak at both the Narcopulcos that I went to. This current year and the year before. And, it's one of those, it's a third rail topic, it's very polarizing. People will get into, real debates with people, very nasty. They turn nasty quick when you bring up the topic of vaccinations, but, it's undeniable. I mean, I know some mothers that have taken I know one mother in particular who took her daughter in when she was 2 to get a vaccine. And the child never spoke again from that point on. And I don't think she's maybe 13 or so now. And she said to me one time, she said, I'll never hear my daughter say, I love you. And I went, oh, and it about broke my heart. And I'm thinking, you people want to say that vaccines don't cause autism or there's no correlation between, have that debate. I dare you, have that debate with that lady. She'd love to have it with you. She knows the difference. She knows that when you take your kid in who's perfectly healthy and then you get them back after the shot and they don't speak from that point on, there's a problem. And I'm interested in your work and your decades of doing that. Did it turn a corner? Did you notice something post 1986 after the Vaccine Protection Act was signed? As the number of vaccines started to ramp up, did you notice that the quality or the lack of care or the cumulative number of vaccines was starting to take an impact from that point forward? Could you benchmark anything, or was it only in hindsight when you went back and noticed that law was passed in 86 that you actually realized that there was a threshold from where it went from there's oversight and legal liability versus once you got into the era where there was no legal liability?
I'm sure there's a big change. For me personally, I didn't notice it because the majority of vaccines are given in childhood. I was not a pediatric nurse. I was an adult medical surgical nurse, and there were not that many vaccines. But I did see the effects. My father, when he was hospitalized for a hip fracture, had a roommate who was paralyzed from a vaccine. He had the flu shot the day before he became paralyzed. And he said, they did all kinds of workup and CAT scans. Everything was negative. He said to me, the roommate said to me, it had to be the vaccine. I said, I think you're right. What could I say? It was an honest assessment. I also had a friend who had a daughter who was turned into a vegetable by vaccine at age 7. There are many other examples from my own experience. There was a nurse I was working with not too long ago, a friend of mine, her son, very healthy young 20-year-old hockey player. He, without his mother's knowledge, without his even giving permission, the doctor came in and jammed him with a chickenpox vaccine because he'd never had chickenpox. Well, within a month, he had ulcerative colitis. It was so bad that it put him out of work. Ulcerative colitis, of course, an autoimmune disease of the intestines. He had to have a part of the intestines removed surgically. He was out of work for a year. His mom had to take time off from work to take care of him. I talked to her with his mom. She agreed it was the vaccine. And those are just some personal examples. But you go online, you'll find many, many people who have testified. And there's no question in my mind, this is part of the population control agenda.
Yeah, and that takes me to sort of my final point, is that this depopulation agenda. And much like mentioning New World Order with people, when you mention depopulation agenda, you get weird looks. But I'll tell you, for something that is supposedly not a real thing, there certainly is a lot of public information about it. There's a lot of people that are talking about it. There's Georgia Guidestones. You have Bill Gates, as you mentioned, giving a TED Talk where he says if we do a really good job with our vaccination program, we can lower that number by about 10 to 15%, talking about world population. Well, I don't know about, and we're talking about lowering populations. I've got Ted Turner on the record saying that the population should be reduced. You've got obviously guys like David Rockefeller and the Rothschilds, and you've got Prince Philip saying that he'd like to come back as a deadly virus and wipe out the population. I mean, what is it? Is this a cultural / religious type thing? Is this something that happens once you become powerful, wealthy, and able to do it, that you just start to change the way you think and feel like those people over there are taking up too much space on my planet? What is it about the psychology of these people that make them want to? I mean, Henry Kissinger talks about useless eaters and saying we should, cut the world's population by 50%. I actually agree. I think we should start with Henry Kissinger and cut him in half and see how things go from there. But what is it about this? What is the psychology of these maniacs that makes them think that it's their Earth and that the rest of us are just taking up space?
First of all, just to validate that this is universal amongst the globalists, Bertrand Russell said, if a Black Death gets spread to the world and every generation the survivors could procreate freely without making the world too full, this state of affairs might be unpleasant, but what of it? Really high-minded people are indifferent to happiness, especially other people's happiness. You mentioned Prince Philip, mentioned Ted Turner, he's calling for a 95% reduction in world population. You'd have to genocide 6 billion people to do that. He doesn't use the word genocide, but the implication is that. Robert McNamara, president of the World Bank, said, he says population overpopulation is, quote, the gravest issue the world faces in the decades ahead. Either the current birth rate must go up, must go down, more quickly, or the current death rates must go up. We just have quote after quote. Zbigniew Brzezinski, this is one of my favorites. He says, in earlier times, it was easier to control 1 million people than to physically kill 1 million people. Today, it is infinitely easier to kill 1 million people than to control 1 million people. So it's all over the place. You can find dozens of these quotes. But in terms of their motive, I think part of it is the satanic desire to kill. You know, what God said to procreate and create life. Satan is a murderer. We know that from the words of Jesus. Also, does seem to be this thing about when they take over their new world order that they envision, they only want enough people around to serve as their slaves. They know that they don't want billions of people around because that, as Brzezinski said, that'll be hard to control. So you just want a few million people around, enough to act as their personal slaves because they know they need that. So that's another factor in it as well, is limiting the number of people who will compete with them for resources on the planet seems to be part of the game. That's some of the mindset that goes into this.
It's devious, and it reminds me of the Aaron Russo movie that he put out, Freedom and Fascism, where he talks about having his conversations with Nick Rockefeller about, what's the end game here? What are you guys going for? And he says, well, at the end, we want to get everybody chipped, microchipped, so we could, have all your banking information, all that, so we could keep track of everybody. So it leads us to the Bill Gates thing once again, and vaccinations once again, where now he's on the record talking about, wouldn't it be, what we really need to do is have these vaccines with chips in them so that we can track where people are, and we can then, figure out where the spread is, or make sure that, like what they talked about, like an under, a tattoo type, under your skin tattoo that they could shine a UV light on to see if you've been vaccinated. Is this... This seems like it's right out of Aaron Russo's conversations with the Rockefellers. I always believed him. I just believed this was going to be 40 years into the future. I didn't think it was going to come about by 2020. Is this where we're headed with the is this a microchipping excuse?
Well, it makes sense that someone like Bill Gates, who's into microtechnology, would be and population control would be the right person to propose putting those two items together, and putting technology together with population control and the monitoring. Of course, it would be beyond monitoring vaccination. It would be monitoring your whereabouts, monitoring your social credit score, perhaps even using these chips. I know that back in 2002, there was already a company called VeriChip that was asking people if they would like to be voluntarily chipped. And then if you went to the ER and you were unconscious, they could wand your wrist and they could find out what your medical history was. And it sounded so good. And Alzheimer's patient could wander off. They could find your identity very quickly. You could find your pet. Of course, a lot of pets are chipped today. So they're trying to put a smiley face on this and make it sound good. But ultimately, it would be used for surveillance, for control. And I believe also it would become a receiver as well as a transmitter. It would actually receive harmful messages that would be used to control you. I have a little doubt in my mind about that. You never know what kind of technology, micro technology, is backdoored into these devices. I would definitely tell anyone to stay away from being chipped or covertly chipped, anything that would covertly introduce a chip into your system.
Yeah. It reminds me of those subliminal messages. If you've ever seen the footage from it was like when back in the olden days, back when our TVs would go off at like midnight, and they would have that final message with the America the Beautiful song would be playing, and then they had text rolling underneath, and somebody took that footage and they slowed it down, and when you slowed down as the text was scrolling, it said things like consume. It was straight out of They Live. I mean, but it was before They Live, but it said consume, obey, your government is your friend and crazy things like this. So if they've got that subliminal technology that exists currently, think of what they've got. They would put in one of these microchips. Like you're talking about it, the frequencies, be a receiver as well as a transmitter. Oh my goodness. Could you imagine the voice to skull technology? They could have you running out in the middle of traffic in 2 seconds or wetting your bed every night or whatever they wanted to do to you. This is some science fiction level madness, is it not?
Yeah, actually, I didn't know about slowing down the patriotic displays of the flag when the stations turned off around midnight. I didn't know about that at all. Thanks I'll have to look into that.
Yeah,
I didn't know that when you slow it.
It'll blow your mind. It's really devious because subliminal messages are an interesting thing because you're like, it's not working, but maybe it is. You don't know if it's working or not. But once you see it laid out like that, it struck me as being very funny. So we'll end this conversation with one last question, and I'm going to ask you to put on your speculative hat on this one. But the recording, you and I are recording this the end of March of 2020. So where are we? What happens with this election in the United States? We've got I don't know, half a year left before it. Are we going to have it? Is it going to go off? Are we going to get Joe Biden versus Donald Trump? Is that going to be a bloodbath? What do you tell me where your head goes with looking into your crystal ball for this election?
I don't have any deep thoughts on it. I've always felt that Biden is kind of a nothing burger as far as a candidate goes. He's increasingly looking senile. You never know what kind of electromagnetic things they might be using on him when he's making a speech, to make him look worse than he actually is. I have no idea. Plus, if anybody ran all the videos of him touching children on camera, that would destroy him right away. They could take him out if they wanted to. I did notice a recent poll showing that he would beat Trump, but given the polls of Hillary winning by 90%, I don't put a lot of faith in polls. I kind of think they do want Trump to stay on. He's been very successful in carrying out the Middle East neocon war agenda, continuing that, and I kind of think they want him to stay in office. Biden seems like an awful candidate. I mean, if you had somebody who was vigorous there, who, had new, bold ideas, but Joe Biden is an old line politician and with not a lot of, provocative things to say. But you never know. I think they could rig the election any way they want. I suppose, and one of the things that occurs to me is that given his apparent drift towards senility, they might have a vice presidential candidate in mind who will take over him that will be much more able to carry out the New World Order agenda than he would probably be able to do much more vigorously than Joe Biden would be able to do. But we'll have to see. There's always, when I was concerned when Michael Bloomberg came on the scene that he was going to become the candidate. Fortunately, like Jeb Bush, he did not have the personality for it. He got destroyed in the debates very quickly. So he did not turn out to be the front runner. But you just don't know who they're going to pick for vice president. And I suppose the vice president worries me a little bit more than Biden himself. Either case, whether it was Biden or Trump, we certainly would turn out to be the losers. I believe.
I wonder if Cheney's available to switch parties and run for. What could possibly go wrong with that? He's James Perloff. You can check him out at jamesperloff.com. Please support his work, buy his books. They're fantastic. And, we can't count on the algorithms to help get the message out. Clearly, they're going to want to silence any of these sorts of topics that we have conversations about. So if you like the video, please share it with your friends and family and get the word out and show your love and support for James by buying his books. James, thanks so much for joining me. I really do appreciate it.
Well, Charlie, thank you very much. It's been an engaging conversation. I wish I'd been a little bit more ready today. Like I said, a few things going on, but really enjoy what you're doing and the insight and judgment and humor that you're bringing into the conversation about what's going on in our world, which is very, very vital right now.
Well, it's one of the things I've always loved about you and your work is that you always bring the funny into it and it's not to say that we're making light of these topics. It's just that sometimes you have to laugh to keep yourself from crying, and we know that better than I think anybody else. So, thank you for the nice words, and we will see you soon.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, and God bless.
Thank you. God bless you too.